Welcome everybody to the LGBTQ plus survival guide to pandemics. I'm super excited about tonight and all the wonderful people we have amassed. My name is Willie Palomo. I work with Utah Humanities, and we're collaborating with the Utah Department of Heritage and Arts and Wasatch Wordsmiths to be able to bring this event to you tonight, focusing on the queer community. We're gonna go through this evening, and the idea behind this event, having the survival guide to pandemics, is the queer community, of course, has already survived major pandemics, especially in the 80s with the AIDS crisis. So we wanted to take this opportunity to bring our communities together and to be able to just share what we've learned, especially having this intergenerational dialogue between some folks who are around for the AIDS pandemic and, you know, some of our young LGBTQ plus members today. I'm gonna read all their bios right now. It's gonna take a minute because there's like 8 of them. I'm gonna go super fast, so don't worry. Like right now is the time if you like, ah, crap, I gotta go pee. Right now is the time to go pee. Make sure your camera's off. That would be really embarrassing if the camera isn't off. But yeah, so I'm gonna read the bios and then we'll go ahead and get started. So first up to the mic is gonna be CONNELL O'DONOVAN. He's one of my favorite people in the world. He's a historian, biographer, and a professional genealogist. He is currently working on the history of female impersonators in Utah from 1860s to the 1930s, which, you know, a lot of people like wouldn't suspect that to be in Utah way back when, but we was out here, as well as a film documentary on the double suicide of 2 young Mormon lesbians in Salt Lake City in 1926. Connell, can you turn on your mic and just say hi to folks real quick?
Hi folks, real quick.
Hi folks, real quick. Connell's one of my favorite people. After Connell, we are going to have Tanisha Nicole, who's an absolute powerhouse. They're a Black, queer, non-binary activist, currently living in Minneapolis, but they grew up in Logan and has spent a good amount of time, especially undergrad, in Salt Lake City, where they graduated from Westminster with a degree in creative writing, which they have been putting to good use. They actively use poetry as a means of connecting with others and creating change since 2014. They have performed in venues all over the country because they've toured. And in 2018, they placed 4th overall in the National Poetry Slam, which probably had like, what, 80 teams competing in it? It was going to be, it's definitely a really competitive event. And it's the first time that Salt Lake City ended up on final stage. So queer community is what helped make that happen. Straight poets were trying forever and couldn't make it happen. Queer community made it happen. Tanisha still has a bio. They have poems on button poetry. They're kind of famous. They have poems on Right About Now. They've done a TEDx talk because, of course, they help run and are in Ink and Nebula and Peculiar, which is a really cool queer journal that's coming out of Utah. If you didn't know, you might want to Google that. And right now they're a publishing assistant for Button Poetry. And in their spare time, Tanisha can be found spending time with their partner, Annie, and their pet cow, Muspresso. Tanisha Nicole, can you please give a shout out to whoever? There's a time to shout out your mom or anybody else you want to, Tanisha.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Willie, and I'm super stoked to be among so many great community members and family.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. Up next, we would have Jennifer Salazar, and Jennifer's bio is right here. She identifies as a Chicana feminista lesbiana. She is a recent graduate of the University of Utah with a double major in gender studies and sociology. She has worked in reproductive justice and transformative justice organizations. In Utah, they were running Wonderlost Sex, which was a really good program doing a lot of reproductive justice work. She currently resides in the Bay Area, California with her girlfriend, and they run a worker-owned cooperative / mutual aid group / art collective called Radical Corazon. Jennifer, tell your peoples what's up.
Hey everyone, thank you for letting me be here. I'm excited to listen to all y'all's stories and poems.
And then after that, we have another really cool person named Faith Hammond, whose bio is at the top right here. They are fat, queer Chickasaw poet currently living in Denver, Colorado, although they consider Salt Lake City their home. Through poetry, Face explores the construction of community, identity, and memory. They co-founded a queer community mic in Columbus, Ohio. You can find their work in the femme literary magazine Ellipsis, shout out to Westminster College there, Crab Fat magazine, Muzzle, and Drunk in a Midnight Choir. Face, let the people know who you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I haven't read in front of people in a long time, and I can't think of a better event to get back into it. So
we are so happy to have you here, Face. After that, we have Becky Moss, who's a true legend in the community. Let me get this bio right here to make sure I do justice. They were producer of the radio program Concerning Gays and Lesbians on KRCL Radio from November 1981 to August 2003. Fun, but the death threats were daunting. Active member of the international radio broadcast about the gay community and AIDS. This project ended when most of the participants passed away from HIV-related illnesses. Founder of the first and third Thursday Womyns Potluck, 1988 to 1995, held in her home. And she's a co-founder of Thelma Louise Coffee, held Sunday mornings at the Pride Center when it was on North 300 West. Member of the Utah Stonewall Democrats from its beginning in January 1990, and a recipient of the Dr. Kristen Reis Award and the Pride Center Lifetime Achievement Award. She's one of our legends here in the Salt Lake community, and we are so grateful that she's made the time to be here. Becky, say hi to your people.
Okay, everybody close your eyes, pretend like you're hearing me on the radio. Now you know who I am.
That was wonderful. Oh my gosh. And then after Becky, we have Dee, one of my favorite poets who introduced me to Poetry Slam in Salt Lake City and made me fall in love when I was in high school. Dee is a weirdo in her mid-30s who lives in Tucson, Arizona now. They live with a roommate and one adorable doggy. Dee works in a grocery store and does hair on the side and can't decide if she's an essential worker or a hostage. Occasionally, Dee pretends to be a musician and writer and creates stuff that almost passes as art. Sometimes. She represents SLC on final stage at the Woman of the World Poetry Slam a million years ago, she says, they say, but it's 2012 when that happened. Dee, say what's up to Utah. Tell Utah what you've been dying to tell Utah.
Utah? Oh, I don't know if I have much to say to Utah, but y'all are great. Hi.
We love you, Dee. And then after that, we would have Pedro Rico, who is one of my favorite people that I've met in the last 2 years. They're absolutely wonderful. They're a non-binary Chicano community organizer, creator, a compassionate and resilient individual, always striving to create spaces for the community to gather. They worked on events from Dia de los Muertos and SLC and are a strong advocate for fostering QTI BIPOC spaces and to gather in community. They received an Associates of Science in Political Science from the Salt Lake Community College, where they also graduated with honors, and they were one of the part of the Civically Engaged Scholars Program. As a part of this work, they were an AmeriCorps alum of the Ed Award and a recipient of the Presidential Awards Community Engaged Student, recognizing their work addressing systemic issues on campus and in the broader community. Right now, Pedro is going to be graduating in May with a Bachelor's of Ed in Policy and Advocacy. Shout out to all the students who are somehow doing school during this crazy time. Y'all are insanely powerful. I'm not sure if I would have been able to graduate if I had to do it during this time. And then they're also looking forward to pursuing their education in fall 2021, where they want to pursue a master's degree in restorative justice, some of the most important work that we can be doing for our communities right now. Especially when it comes combating the prison industrial complex. And last but not least, we will have Enan closing us off to the night. NN is a chubby transmasculine person who writes too much about gender. He is a stereotypical Capricorn sun and Libra moon. He is a Midwesterner at heart and likes to ignore the fact that he was raised in California. He has represented Westminster College and CUPSI in 2018 and 2009, as well as in the Love Loud stage. You can find his work and write about now. Pedro, I didn't give you a chance to like say what's up to all your people, so we'll do Pedro saying what up, and then we'll do NN. Forgive me, Pedro.
Hey everyone. To my people, I guess, again, I love my mom. So thank you, mother. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. So thank you everyone for attending.
Okay, and then your shout outs, what you want to tell Utah right now.
What I want to tell Utah right now, this is very on the spot. I don't know. But stay safe, wear your masks, please.
Thank you. Really important public health announcement from NN. We're going to get started, and we got all the bios out of the way, so we're going to get like a bunch of stories and a bunch of poems now. I'm super excited. Yes, reminders, if you're having tech issues, reach out to Emily Starr, who's our superstar for tonight. If you want subtitles, go to the 3 dots at the bottom of your screen and click on show subtitles. And if at any point you're panicking, you can drop something in the chat. If you drop something in the chat, everyone will see it unless you DM somebody specifically, which you should have the power to do. And please let folks know how you're feeling in your chat. I come from very expressive communities, so go ahead and put your little applause or your thoughts in the chat. And if you have questions at any point, go ahead and drop them. I'm going to be keeping them in my magic little head here. And then when it's time for Q&A, we'll just dip into the Q&A. With that, we are finally ready to begin the show. That took 15 minutes. Thank you so much for your patience. I love you all. Connell, are you ready?
I think so.
Go for it, Connell.
Yeah? Okay. So first off, I identify as queer and gay and non-binary, and I use mainly male pronouns. I also have asthma, and it gets triggered by nerves. So if I start puffing on my inhaler, you'll know why, because I'm nervous. My experience during the AIDS pandemic years began 1983 when I was in Northern California with the Army. I was stationed there until 1985. I was in Monterey, just like 2 hours south of San Francisco, which, San Francisco and New York were the 2 ground zeros for the AIDS epidemic. So I was really close to where all that stuff was going on. And during those years, I was also married to a woman. And then 9 years, then in 85, I moved to Utah, came out to the military and got kicked out. And then came out in 85 here in Utah as well. And then I returned, after 9 years, I returned to Northern California, to Santa Cruz, which is an hour and a half south of San Francisco. And I lived there for almost 20 years. So the 9 years in Utah and then 20 years in California sort of spans my interaction, my engagement with AIDS and AIDS activism. I would have come out of the closet sooner than 85, but I was really terrified that I was going to get AIDS. And then at those early times, we didn't know how you could contract it. It just seemed like, especially gay men, you would see them 1 week and they'd be fine. 3 weeks later, they would have purple lesions, and then a month later, they were dead. It was so virulent, and it was so freaky, frightening, and so I kind of really held back about my sexuality. And yet I was also married at the time and engaging in minorly risky behaviors outside of my marriage before coming out and before divorcing my wife. And I still feel horribly guilty about that because I really endangered her, as well as, breaking my marriage vows with her. So that's stuff that I still carry from that time. Part of the struggle for me during HIV/AIDS pandemic was feeling like there was this bizarre, nonsensical death sentence hanging over me. You know, I felt like I was the Walking Dead. Like it could strike me at any moment, and it was just over, and it seemed inevitable. Like it was going to happen. I was going to get AIDS and I was going to die, and it was going to be fairly soon. And because of that impending sense of doom and death, I really did very little to prepare for a future of growing older. And that really sucks. You know, why engage deeply in education if you're going to die? Why engage in meaningful, long-lasting relationships if you're going to die? Why have long-lasting employment if you're going to die? Why save my money? Why buy a house? You know, why get an IRA? It just all seemed really irrelevant. And, you know, and now I'm not reaping because I did not sow. You know, that it's just, I live very precariously now as an aging gay man because I had spent so much time in fear and with this impending sense of death. So, yeah, not fun. And then another part of my struggle was feeling like such a pariah in my own family, within the larger community, and within the LDS church that I grew up in. You know, being told that I was no longer welcome to come to family functions. Now it was for two reasons. It had been originally just because, of course, I'm gay, so I'm a pedophile, and I'm out to recruit youngsters. So I'd already been sort of banned from family functions, but now, you know, with the AIDS epidemic, they're like, we don't want you around because you're going to give us AIDS, you know. And it was just, it was really, really just a horrible way to live. And then Willie asked a question of me in the email preparing for this about how did we, the queer community, engage with each other to protect each other during this pandemic. Although I came out in 1985, other than clubbing at gay bars, I didn't really engage at all with the lesbian and gay community. And I'm gonna say lesbian and gay community because back then that's what it was. There was no transgender community, and we certainly did not recognize bisexuals at all. And so that's what we were called, was the lesbian and gay community. Finally, in '88 is when I became an activist. And something that I noticed when I came out, and this is really shameful to me, so many gay men back then were rabidly sexist pigs. And especially in the bar culture back then, I heard gay men say some of the most horrible things about women, and especially lesbians. There was a lot of gay male animosity directed towards lesbians at that time. And I'm disgusted to say that I myself engaged in some of that behavior. After 25 years of living in the closet and wallowing around in all that self-hatred and suicidal desires, when I finally came out, I was toxic as hell. And I just spent a lot of time spewing toxicity at other people, trying to somehow negotiate this new landscape that I was in. But as I became more political, I became really inspired by the most political members of the lesbian community, and especially those in academia. And Becky Moss, of course, was one of my stars that I just, you know, she was such a guiding light for me and many other gay men back in those days. But still at that point, there seemed to be this enormous divide between the gay men's community and the lesbian community. But then as AIDS ravaged the men's community, I witnessed one of the most gracious and beautiful things in my life, and that was the lesbian community really stepping up for us. And you know, just, it really, I'm so grateful that when our government certainly wasn't there for us at all. Our churches weren't there for us, our families weren't there for us, but our lesbian sisters really came to the rescue. So all the AIDS activism and education, because the government wouldn't respond, all of that activism and education came from us. It was all grassroots. And, you know, it was certainly, the lesbians took a lot of leadership role in that, because they, having been dealing for years not only with homosexuality, but also with sexism, you know, the feminist politics had led them to have a set of skills that a lot of gay men didn't have. And we learned from the lesbian community how to do things like hold press conferences and write press releases, and how to lobby the legislature, you know, how to talk to reporters, and all kinds of things like that. And virtually everything I learned about activism came from watching and ultimately befriending lesbian feminists. And just to, still some of my most profound friendships are with my queer sisters, and I really, really appreciate that. Here in Utah, for example, you know, Dr. Patty Reagan organized the first AIDS organization here, and then Dr. Kristen Reis and her partner Maggie Snyder were the only medical staff in the entire, I want to say a bad word, the entire freaking state of Utah, who would treat people with HIV and AIDS. No other doctor, no other nurses would do it. And thank goddess these two amazing women, you know, stepped up and were there for us. And then, you know, just everyday acts of the lesbian community doing food drives and basic home care, and ultimately hospice care for us when our own families, you know, wouldn't take care of us. And the division between the men's and women's queer communities, I think, was really greatly healed from that. Engaging with each other in meaningful political ways really helped us both to grow, both communities to grow and develop and deepen. So when the government failed to help us, we took care of ourselves. And I just think that's extraordinary. You know, we lost so many beautiful, talented, creative people, but we also learned how to be political, how to actively engage in the system to improve it and to make it accountable to us. You know, now here we have COVID-19. Once again, I'm in a high-risk group. Although I'm not older, I'm 59, pushing 60, so I'm not in that older age group that gets priority, you have 70 and older, but you know, I'm obese, I'm diabetic, I have hypertension, high blood pressure, I have asthma, I have chronic bronchitis. So, you know, my health puts me in a really, really risky situation, and I'm terrified. Thank goddess, I have learned that I am an amazing introvert. I had no idea. I thought I was pretty extroverted and, you know, and all this stuff. I am just a happy little clam here in my little quarantine bubble. And just, you know, it's a struggle. I don't own a car. So, you know, groceries and things like that, doctor's appointments, that's tricky, and I have to be really careful. But I also see, you know, how the government is engaging with both pandemics is so different. With AIDS, you know, hundreds of thousands of gay men and people of color died from AIDS during the Reagan administration. And that SOB refused to say the word AIDS in public during his entire administration. There is so much blood on his hands, and you know, just it drives me crazy how much further along we could have been had the government stepped up. You know, and now I just watched Dr. Fauci on CNN tonight, and he is just beaming. He's just like, oh, I can freely speak now, and I can actively engage with this pandemic and do what needs to be done. And I'm really excited to see how we can move forward with this. And I say these things in the name of Judy Garland. Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Connell, for your vulnerability, for your story. That was amazing. Tanisha Nicole, you're up.
Thank you. That was so awesome. I feel really honored and blessed to be in a space like this. Similar to what Face was saying, I have not been in like speaking engagements in a hot second, and this feels like a really good one and a really good space to be in. So thanks for welcoming me. The pandemic has left me with a lot of time on my hands. So I spend a lot of time watching Netflix, and by that I mean I watch a lot of Brene Brown's A Call to Courage because I watch it on repeat. And I've thought a lot about this concept of healing and what it means to heal and navigate spaces that may not want you to exist, and how a lot of that comes from the act of witnessing and being witnessed. And so I'm going to read a poem about the acts of witnessing that have helped me heal in otherwise times in which I may not have done so. So this poem is called On Healing for Real This Time, after Lyd Havens and Bill Moran. Bless every place I have learned to reinvent the ways I love myself. Bless every Torrid and Target and Ross for being gentle on the days I only want to hurt. Bless all of the people who have let me hurt and still loved me in the morning. Bless every time I put myself before a razor, then stopped before breaking skin. Bless every tattoo shop sanctuary that has turned my need to break skin into masterpiece. Bless Lucky 13 and Cathedral and Defining and SLC Inc. and All Wolves, No Sheep and all the shops and cities I've only been to once. Bless the state of Minnesota, even in the winter. Bless that even though 1,300 miles away was enough of a difference to mean that my best friend is still on the other end of the phone when I call. Bless every friend turned therapist. Bless Rye and Cozy and Mariella and Melissa and Viv and Daisy and CJ and Carissa, and how when my problems are too big, they tell me to go to Rachel, my actual therapist. Bless all of the unpaid emotional labor they do for me anyway. Bless Rachel for still doing sessions with me even when I didn't have insurance. Bless the sessions that were working, and bless the poems for when they didn't. Bless Watchtower Cafe and even Stevens for being home to my emotional overflow. Bless Slam, even when I didn't play to win. Bless the open mic and the courage it sees. Bless Dorothy and Ann and Jose and Bryce and Mama Deb and RJ and Harper and Carrie and Alexa and Jesse and Ashley and Ricky and Daisy and Selena and everyone who's ever helped me grow as a writer. Bless cats and how something so little has been enough to keep me alive. Bless that even after all of this, I am still alive. Bless unconditional love, even when I feel I don't deserve it. Bless every way I've been reminded that I do deserve it. Bless every resident for investing in me the same way I did in them. Bless Paige for always asking what my proudest accomplishment was until I had a better answer than staying alive. Bless the ways I've learned to thrive. Bless every workshop and free write and notebooks holding secrets that Rachel didn't know yet. And bless that over the course of a year, I've become who I am right now. Bless that I am not the same person everyone who's ever hurt me knew. Bless the work that I have put into getting here, even when I wanted to quit. Bless that my mama didn't raise no quitter. Bless that I still got the fight inside of me underneath all of this trauma. Bless every time I thought I'd found salvation but didn't quite have it right. Bless the ways I've grown instead. Bless this healing that's come in the form of people and places and things, and bless the ways it will continue to come if I let it. And oh, bless and bless and bless and bless that for the first time, I want to let it. So, thanks. That's my poem. And I just kind of want to close out by saying that right now we might be really stuck in the sense of the pandemic, and also just maybe feeling like you're stuck inside in the world. And it's really hard to want to feel like you can be connected with people, but I think that act of witnessing and being honest with yourself and holding space with yourself is something that can be done with a community via online spaces and circles. And I think that now is as big of a time as any to really embrace those and really like let yourself be witnessed as well as do the witnessing for yourself or others. And in the words of Brene Brown, loving ourselves through the process of owning our own story is the bravest thing that we will ever do. So I encourage you all to stay brave. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tanisha Nicole. This has been really special. I'm just gonna get out of the way. Jennifer Salazar, you're amazing too. Hop up on the mic.
Hey everyone, so I have my little note, so if I look down, that's that. So I live here in the Ohlone territory, so Bay Area, California. I'm also, along with being a lesbiana, I'm also Pisces and bipolar, so if I get very sad girl or emotional, that's another part of me. But a little bit more background on me. My political home is based on queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color liberation, reproductive justice, and transformative justice. And these theories stem from Black feminist theory, abolition, healing justice, and Indigenous futurisms. So with the prompt that Willie sent over, just like a little bit more background on my development as a young leader in the LGBTQ community, and a little bit more about my process of kind of getting to where I am now. A lot of what I've learned over the years, and this kind of radicalization happened when I questioned a lot of the shame that came from the religion that I was raised in, alongside with CONNELL, it was Mormonism. I came out about 10 years ago when I was 16, and within, the questions and reading a lot, I met a lot of amazing friends and organizers and community, and they really saved me. And so a little bit more on my work, I worked for Planned Parenthood for quite a while. I got more involved with sex education, specifically for the queer community. I wanted to create safe spaces that I needed when I was younger and when I was a young closeted queer. In November 2019 to March 2020, I co-founded a cutie BIPOC community center called Xochicalli, which means the flower house in Nahuatl, which I also speak Nahuatl. And this was made with Existimos Collective, and we housed this in Midvale, Utah. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, we had to close the studio. And on top of all the stress of then becoming unemployed, I also lost my housing, and I was just in a really stressful situation, a lot of heartbreak, and a lot of kind of figuring out what next, how do I kind of start over and move from that. Which my move to California, I moved with my girlfriend, my now fiance, and her family. And a month later, in April, my best friend, Esli Trujillo Cortez, They're a young, queer, trans, non-binary person that goes by they and she pronouns, but they went missing on Thursday, April 23rd, 2020, and their car was found crashed and abandoned on a road between Ogden and Eden, Utah, and they still have not been found. And my chosen family and mutual aid organizations are what, of a lot of healing, but it's what sustains me and gives me hope. This past year has been the hardest year of my life, and what's kept me alive is my community. And something that I have to remind myself is I'm able to experience joy while holding grief. And I also have to keep my imagination and hope for rebuilding futures and keeping my community and chosen family safe and supported. Since all the tragedies of March and April with the COVID pandemic and a lot of personal trauma, I have still tried to have more moments of joy. And I think queer joy is really important. I started an art collective and mutual aid organization called Radical Corazon. And that has brought a lot of joy of, again, making sure that food is distributed, that I can create art, and that has been a lot of healing for me. I also proposed to my fiance, and just trying to hold on to queer love and queer joy is definitely what keeps me going. I think what I want people to know is that we can build new worlds and we can still stay connected, even when we physically cannot be together. I really am dreaming of when, you know, the LGBTQ community, instead of unpacking a lot of shame and trauma and marginalization because of the way that society has created those marginalizations, that we can just focus more on and have the opportunity for healing and rest. And I think, you know, inside during this quarantine, I think I've just been really trying to focus on healing. I think that the LGBTQ folks around me have just really built community through mutual aid organizations and that collectivity. Although this year has been filled with grief from the countless stories of missing and murdered Indigenous women and gender nonconforming people, the murders of Black and Brown people from police and white supremacist institutions, and the neglect from government to help with medical care and financial relief, and that the pandemic was ignored for so long. I also, this past week, my fiance's grandmother died of COVID on Sunday night. And it's just been such a heartbreaking time for my family and for myself. But despite everything, community's here. And it's seen today on this panel, and it's seen in community and with each other. So a quote that I liked from the Black Disability Collective kind of mentions staying hopeful and imagining community care, but it reads, I want to stay hopeful for meaningful community care, that everyone can experience the healing nature of community care and begin to understand that this is where our collective liberation lies. And I just wanted to kind of end with a poem that, just a thought that was also by Ez. Ez is a poet and a really beautiful writer, and I felt like they needed to be here too. So, sorry. Ez says, I am a brown, queer, and non-binary writer. Sorry, I'm gonna just take a moment to just kind of collect my thoughts. Who writes about personal stories that are about my childhood, culture, and dreams for queer, trans, people of color excellence and brilliance. I believe our future is bright and beautiful. I write because I feel that we are the generation that will ensure a better tomorrow. And being among all of y'all, I feel that and I believe it. And I know that this year has brought a lot of tragedy and a lot of pain. And I know that as queer folks, we hold a lot of that grief. But it's also really important to acknowledge our joy and working on healing. And sorry, I did not think I was gonna cry. I really practiced this, but it did not work. So thank you again for creating space and that we can be together, because I think, you know, especially in this time of isolation and this time of distance, you know, community is everything. And so thank you everyone for bringing this together and for sharing your stories. And I'm very honored to be among all of y'all amazing people. And so that's a bit of the story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you for sharing so much of yourself too. In the chat, I dropped a link where you can find the campaign to find Ez. And thank you so much for bringing them into this space. That means a lot. Base Hammond, you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to thank everyone who's already shared their story and everyone who's going to share their story. This space is really amazing and I'm glad to be here. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. As I said in my bio, I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and I also, when I perform, like to acknowledge the land that I'm on. So for folks in Salt Lake, you are on traditionally Ute, Goshute, and Eastern Shoshone land. And for where I'm at in what's currently called Denver, I'm on traditionally Arapaho and Cheyenne land. And I just want to, you know, remind folks to support Native and Two-Spirit, queer Native and Two-Spirit artists and Native artists in general. And then also, if any of you happen to be landowners, to have you consider giving that to the nations who traditionally steward the land. So I am also really invested in better futures, Indigenous futures, and queer futures. So I tried to choose a couple of poems that I had that were place-based or about a better world. And the first one is about the Paper Moon, which was a lesbian bar in Salt Lake City, and it closed a few years ago. There's only 15 lesbian bars left in the United States, so these women-centric spaces are disappearing. And hopefully we can create more spaces, especially non-alcoholic spaces, but I think it's really a loss to our community that these places are disappearing. So this is an elegy for the last lesbian bar in Utah. The Paper Moon preened in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains, a $20 cab from Salt Lake's downtown buzz and just a stone's throw from the nearest church. She, lone haven of Sappho's daughters, prettied herself in pink. The walls, the carpet, even the pool table felt. She knew who she held and we danced there before we could recognize the Holy Spirit in our deviant bodies. The DJ spun Tegan and Sarah while my first girl kissed the house drink on my lips without wondering who was watching. We surged on the dance floor, all curve and muscle, gorging on the blasphemy of it all. The pink moon glistening down on clutches of the pious, praying next door for us to give them back their city and their good God's moon. Yet we, small choir, sang our hymns without need of a hymnal because tonight we were alive and we were ourselves without fear. The Paper Moon herself folded our fingers together, poured us dollar shots, asked us to the dance floor. The Paper Moon herself promised no death here, no hellfire, nor outer darkness, nor excommunication. She did promise love, or lust, or just a goddamn drink, all while singing her gospel. My daughters, I wax for you tonight, and every night you need a loving sky. I brim with home for you, eternal and unwaning. I really only got to go to the Paper Moon a few times because I was underage most of the time. I lived in Utah, but it's still a place that really was formative for me. So I miss it. I wish I could have gone back. So my last poem for the night before I hand it off to the next person is it's an alternate ending for Medusa, who I care a lot about as a figure. The other figure in the poem is Alecto, who is a fury. So I just wanted to imagine a future for them where they're loved and there's not so much violence. So here's to a less violent future. This is the alternate ending for Medusa without Perseus. After the shipwreck, after vengeful gods and hungry men, Medusa fled the sea, found a quiet corner in a mountain meadow where waves can't touch her. She tends to the field, plants seasonal veggies and pushes earth between her fingers. Garden snakes nest in her crown, whisper that Medusa is loved, and she is love, and she listens even if she does not believe it. And her furious Alecto holds her every night, especially when the nightmares break across their bed. And Alecto says, breathe, breathe, and Medusa does. And when the next night brings terror down on her love, Medusa says, breathe, breathe, and Alecto does. And they sleep on the tide, holding hands, and wake up not drenched, but only damp. And years later, Medusa loves the rain, for how it feeds her small growing things and cools her skin without drowning her. And Alecto calls her inside, not out of fear, but to kiss her warm. And on the days when skin is too much, Medusa returns to the garden, and Alecto paints the sunset, and they hold each other without touching at all. And they find each other, loved and broken, but still whole. And there is not a single stone of a man who came too far to hunt the remains of women other men left in rubble. There are no waves, no salt, no entitled God, no shipwreck. Just two women finding each other and finding themselves. And Medusa listens, and she lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your poems, Faith. And I did not know that about only 15 lesbian bar. What? That blows my mind. And oh my gosh. So thank you for your land acknowledgement, for just dropping so much knowledge on us. Up next, we have someone who needs no introduction, Becky Moss.
So every Wednesday, Mondays at first, and then Wednesdays, I introduced it as good afternoon and welcome to Concerning Gays and Lesbians. Every Wednesday at this time, we talk about issues of sexual minorities. If you are or know or love someone who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, or HIV affected, then the next half hour should prove entertaining as well as informative. So contrary to what Connell said, in 1981, I was including the LGBT community. We used queer on the radio. When I started on the radio, I thought I was going to come in as that raging feminist because the program had only been talking about gay male issues. But immediately I was slapped right in the middle of the face with this thing called GRID, gay-related immune disorder. Got on the radio in November of 1981 and said, guess what? It's not GRID, it's AIDS. And from there on in, fought like crazy. We finally designated one of the 4 weeks of every month to be nothing but conversation about AIDS and HIV and try to address the rumors and the stories and to figure out what was going on. So I was living with AIDS constantly in my life. And then I'd wander around to the bars to hand out condoms and to talk about safer sex and find out that there were people in the gay community who were absolutely clueless and did not know that this was happening. The government didn't talk about it. The health department, there were employees at the health department who wanted to help us, but the man who led the health department kept denying the funding to be sent forward, and he actually sent people into the radio station one time accusing me of allowing Dr. Patty Reagan to say things she'd never said. The look of shock and horror when he found out that my programs were all taped and we had the proof of what had been said. And remembering too that I need to remind you all, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have ways to get information quickly. It was listening to a radio that got you information. So I worked a full-time job. I had foster daughters, I had a partner, I had a full life, I had parents and family in Utah, and I was prowling the libraries, looking at the latest newspapers, trying to find information about AIDS everywhere I could to try to help prevent the spread. We warned people that this disease was going to affect us all by the end of the decade or the century. All of us would be touched personally. In 1985, the Utah Health Department issued a statement saying there were 17 people recognized as having AIDS in Utah. Well, on Christmas Day 1985, I lost my 25th friend to AIDS, and that was Rick Shea. 2 years later, August 1987, Newsweek, their cover was a whole bunch of photos of people who had been lost to AIDS. And there was Rick's photo on the front of that. Rick was Catholic in Iowa, and his parents didn't know we hid it from him. We hid everything. You didn't tell people that you were AIDS, that you had AIDS, because that meant you were gay. In fact, one of the first jokes I remember being told about AIDS on Jimmy Carson was, the hardest part about having AIDS is convincing your parents that you're Haitian. Because at that time, the two biggest collections of people who had AIDS were from Haiti and gay men. It was terrifying and painful and horrible, and it felt like you were constantly being stomped on and abused. And then false information all the time. In the late 80s, we had a doctor going around, and she was telling people that HIV didn't cause AIDS, and people were buying into this, and it made them die faster, even though we had doctors like Dr. Reis who were taking whatever drugs could be available and applying them to things. I still feel so frustrated because it was such a constant, painful time. I would go into the bars looking for old friends, and I'd ask around, and they'd just shake their heads. A lot of the guys went home to families, to whatever state they were from. Others just died. And I'm going to step in here. The Catholic Church in Utah stepped in and had places for them to stay, and they also took care of funerals. So even though we weren't getting support from other religious organizations in Utah, I am still grateful like crazy to the Catholics here. I want to make this as personal as possible here. I want to tell some specific stories, and I just picked out very few names. Brad came home to Centerville, Utah. I'd known him since I was a little kid. Brad's parents set up a bedroom for him, got him his own phone line so he could stay in touch with friends, and they did everything his parents knew what to do. And Brad, to just make his life better, they were so happy to have their son back. This was in the early 80s, and when Brad died, the people arrived in full hazmat suits to remove his body, and his parents didn't get to see him again. They had hazmat suit people come right into their home. Rick, with I told you about Rick Shea appearing on Newsweek, and figured his parents could just deal with it. Rick was so lovely and so wonderful. David Sharpton, he started the People with AIDS Coalition. He came back home to Utah. And David, it got into his brain, but when I first met David, we brought him on the radio and had him talk about it, and I shocked the living daylights out of him as we left, because I made him stop and I gave him a hug, and he told me that I was the first person to hug him without dressing up and being active since he had admitted he had HIV. Just a simple hug made that wonderful man just cry, and he was so amazing. Teresa, we met a week after she was adopted, she and her brothers were 2, 3, and 4 years old when they were adopted. And I thought it was so amazing that Teresa's parents could have grown-up kids like my age, 4 years old. And I thought adoption was pretty cool, a lot better than having all these babies my parents were having. Lost Teresa in 1989, and I've known her since we were itty bitties. Keith lived our backyards touched. We knew each other. I can't remember not knowing Keith. Keith would always play mom when he would insist that all the kids got together and he'd play house in the yards and he was mom. Just lost Keith a few years ago. Brett Hansen. Brett appeared on the first day of kindergarten, and he stopped at the house to pick up me and my sister. We both were the same age. And he would pick out the clothes we had to wear and walk us to school every single day. And we would wait for him. And because of Brett, I survived a lot of elementary school safely because I was a tomboy. And I'm telling you, we were supposed to wear skirts, dresses, little socks, little pretty stuff. In fact, Brett would help me when I got home to make sure my mom didn't find out that I'd torn everything up again. Brett went on to be a cheerleader at the University of Utah. Lost Brett in the early 80s. And then I told you that we said we would be touched personally by this pandemic, and I knew I'd been touched personally. And in 1990, my little sister, Peggy, gave birth to the only boy that we've had in our family, and he was sick. Chance was the first child diagnosed in the world as full-blown AIDS at birth. Up till then, they said that children couldn't be born with AIDS. Of course, they didn't listen to the Black women who in Africa who were showing that their babies were sick. Instead, this is a blonde, blue-eyed baby boy born in Holy Cross Hospital in Salt Lake City. 4 years later, we lost Chance, and then 9 months after that, I lost my sister Peggy. Peggy and Chance were unbelievably amazing AIDS educators. They got their Faces of Age in Utah. They put their pictures on buses and billboards, and Peggy and Chance went around all over the state and up into Idaho to talk about AIDS and how it could be passed, and that it went to everybody, that it wasn't just a young white men, gay men's disease. That was another thing, is I had older gay men tell me they couldn't get it because it was a young white men's disease. The news was not giving us very good information. So AIDS took up and it killed us, killed the people in my life all over the place. It took a huge part of my soul. And I finally got to the point where I couldn't attend the funerals anymore. But we did something other people didn't realize. When the AIDS pandemic first started, we were attending funerals, and you'd see all these dykes dressed up in ill-fitting dresses that we'd found in closets or we borrowed from somebody, and would attend the LDS ward houses to go to these funerals. And enough was enough, and we started to hold the funerals the way our friends had lived. We started to hold them in the mortuaries, and we started to hold them in the bars, and we started to tell their stories, and we started to tell the truth of who we were. And we spoke the truth of who people were, and we loved each other openly. And you know what? Our parents started to join us. My grandmother, a lady who was lived in Moroni, Utah, central Utah, Mormon, made sure that my sister and my nephew knew that everything that they needed would be taken care of. And she told people in Moroni, this is what's happening to my niece and my granddaughter and my nephew or my grandson. This is what's happening. You have to be careful. You have to use condoms. She took me aside and said, Becky, you've got to be careful because you're experiencing more deaths than the people my age are. And when we die, we're dying of old age, and we have funerals, and we're getting together, and we're experiencing reunions, and we're loving on each other. Your friends are dying too soon. You've got to take care of yourself, because when you get to my age and you start having the deaths that are coming naturally, it's going to tear you apart. Well, guess what? Now we're at the age my grandmother was, and we've got a new pandemic in here. So I'm going to end this with the most important part I can tell you. When the lesbians stepped forward and started to love the gay men and to take care of them and to show them they loved them and to ignore the horrible, terrible, misogynistic things that gay men had said to us, we just told them that didn't matter. You have to be loved. And that's what we have to do now. Love everybody, wear those masks, and it's going to be okay. We're going to survive this, and our children and our great-grandchildren and this whole world will be better because of the strength that we have now.
Becky, thank you isn't enough for everything you've done. Thank you. Up next, we have Dee.
I gotta follow that. Thanks. Thanks, Willie. Okay. I use they, their, or she, her pronouns, queer, pansexual, gender fluid, I guess. That's still kind of an ever-evolving thing. So I've known Willie, like you said, for a long time now. I think like 10 years. And, you know, he asked me to do this, and I haven't done this in a long time either. I think the last time I was on a team was with Face in 2014. So, you know, these are old poems. I'm sorry. But, you know, one of the things that Willie told me, like as a prompt for a poem that did not get written, was, you know, your queerest moment. And I'm like, you know, I kind of already have one of those. So this is called Border Towns. She's not a man, yet she moves into my hand like she's trying to soak up some of my woman. I tell her she's beautiful. She shrugs this off, wraps hair around Adam's apple, curls herself small into my arms. She's Jack in the Box, hiding springs to blend in, not wanting to startle me. I cannot know her by winding her up. So I adjust my gestures, touch her unique, maneuver around foreign territory. There is a place between countries where she tells me we are just alike, where we are all merely skeleton wrapped in soft tissues, where identities intertwine. This place on her body is a physical manifestation of Spanglish. Her body is a border town between sand and where tide drops off into abyss. Her endocrine system is a seal's refusal to transition into fish, evolution's way of keeping her mammal, yet unable to live on land or in water. She is mermaid, wanting nothing more than to spread fins into X chromosome lakes. I would go the rest of my life carrying foreign between mine if it meant she could feel like herself even for a day. I would trade my legs for fins, my lungs for gills, if we could build a border town between humans, where apples have no reason to be hidden, where everybody is beautiful in any combination of languages. And then, you know, kind of going along with loss and grief and, you know, yeah, it's been a tough year. Lost a few people, lost a lot of things. And then Willie asked me to read a poem that's literally called The Place of Lost Things. So I guess it does kind of tie in here. I found it. The place of lost things. Everything I've ever lost is here. By the washing machine, springing from the basket of every half pair of socks I now wear is mismatched, is a stuffed leopard I dubbed Figaro as a child. Scattered on the floor are 50 partially smoked packs of cigarettes, being casually ignored by the friends I lost over smoking them. From the dusty ceiling hangs a chandelier of lost cell phones, containing numbers of acquaintances I can no longer find, all holding each other to replace the touch I've lost with them. The doorbell is wired to my missing hearing. If you listen closely, you'll find all of my misconnections from never hearing their presence. This place of lost things smells like my love of the South, a lost appetite for biscuits and grits, my study in the arms of new lovers. Every door is my ex, entertaining the baby I miscarried 10 years ago, lacquered in my desire to have any children ever, all framed with the word no. Each doorknob is molded from the hollowed out space of missing permission. The carpet is woven from my implied consent, dyed with ground teeth dust, matted with my hijacked fuck, nailed down by my stolen breath every time I feel humidity. In the mirror, I find myself pretending to be someone else, while my reflection is someone else pretending to be me. I find myself strangely comfortable, too familiar with loss. I find high blood pressure, I find hostility, I find depression, I recognize exhaustion crumpling into hardwood floors. This place of lost things has become a place of found things, but I find that I'm losing myself here. I find I cannot be found without getting lost first, lost in nostalgia, like a hoarder of memories. There, stitched into the upholstery of death's love seat, I find my grandpa's cancer, the lake that drowned James, the knife used on Jenna, and I find my panic. I find despair choking my limbs like another officer waiting with handcuffs. I find my accidental overdose staring me down like my imminent death, and I realize it's not today. I break down every unredeemed brick with grateful fingertips until I no longer need to define my life by how I've been hurt, but by finding myself in the rubble, here, in this place of found me. I melt the silence from the mortar of secrets with my truth. I incinerate the remains with refusing to be a victim, and I take my fuck back from the ashes with the beak of my built-in phoenix. I am baptized in the shards of so much forgiveness. My lost God would be jealous. I lose this whole house and find home. I lose my home and find the whole world. I lose my world and find an entire universe. I find that I am an entire universe, places yet to be found.
Thank you so much, Dee. Our last storyteller, and then we have our last poet coming up. But up next, we have Pedro.
Hi, everyone. I just want to I want to thank everyone who's spoken and all the poets. Really, I find I've related to a lot that has been said, and I'm really appreciative of the space that, that really helped put together and alongside other organizers. And yeah, I'm just thinking about how needed having these, just having a space for us to speak our own truths, our own stories, and speaking our stories, you connect with people, and I find myself learning more about myself through your stories and through your poetry. So I really am deeply appreciative. I guess just a little bit about me, a little bit of my background. I am a queer, non-binary Chicano, and I was raised by a wonderful trabajadora, my mother, and she supported me and my 4 siblings, and she and my father migrated here, and there's a lot of trauma that she has carried, and she just for the longest time, wasn't able to heal from it. And now that I'm older, and now that I've been able to recognize my own trauma, I've been able to have a more stronger connection with her. And thinking about, surviving, it's an all too familiar experience for me. And I want to provide, a content warning, because I will be speaking about childhood trauma and sexual violence. And so I will not be offended if you have to like step aside or mute me, because I don't want people to relive their trauma if it's too heavy. But growing up, had to survive sexual abuse from a family member, and I was tormented by them day in and day out. And I can't recall the age I was, because I think most of that time I spent it to disassociating. And I believe I was 7 or 8, but I shared this experience with my brother as well. And we both, did our best to hold each other and to provide ourselves comfort. And, going through that experience, with him, it was just really intense for children, and we didn't know how to communicate it. But I've always, growing up, my mother has always told me stories that I was always the protector of my older brother. And I always looked out for him. And my brother and I feel really horrible for him, because I think he's just trying really hard to continue finding himself. And I think, it's just hard, especially growing up poor. And we think of these survival strategies, right? And I have a fan because of my makeup, but and I'm just thinking of like, because I don't want to smudge my makeup or anything, but thinking of like these survival strategies, like they're great and all, but at the same time, I'm angry because I want to live in a world where we didn't have to come up with these, with these tactics, these practices. I think about like not having access to like dental care, right? And a lot of the advice was, from my mom was like, oh, mijo, all you have to do is take a shot of tequila and it'll cure you right up. And those are just ways that, how do you, I guess, for my mother is like, how does she go about explaining the realities of this, of this system, the racism, the classism, the relentless violence, and you just cannot, and you have to come up with tactics to move you forward. And as I grew up, as I've entered my education, I entered into a class in philosophy where I learned, where it taught me a lot of things, and it taught me especially about control and the lack of control, and that I cannot control a lot of these external factors. And thinking about the pandemic now, when it first got here in the United States, I was panicked. I was full of a lot of stress because I was hearing the reports from China and how it was spreading exponentially because of multi-family households. And I was just so worried because, I think of my mom and how I'm not ready to lose her, because there's so much knowledge that she has that I had, at a young age. She was working a lot, right? Like she had more than one job, and we didn't really have a lot of conversations. And now that she's finally retiring, you know, I can finally have more time with her and speak to her about a lot of her knowledge and learn from her, because she's done a lot of good Andera work, and it's something that I'm coming, you know, recognizing my own gifts and recognizing recognizing my gravitation towards restorative work and harmony, that immediately I was fearful of my family, fearful of, you know, my living conditions, because I live with my partner and their family, and it was a lot of stress, and I think a lot of it was just like coming to accept it's coming to accept like the conditions of our lives. And I'm not particularly happy with that, but I think right now my first thoughts were to check in with my family and check in with the people who are really closest to me and do what I could to make sure that they were safe, that they were secure. In the early summer, I lost my cousin, and it was really extremely troubling for me because I just rekindled that relationship with him, and in early spring, and he was studying to become a barber, and he had his own traumas, you know, and you know, it was so great to like talk to him again as primos and have him talk to me about what he was doing, about wanting to cut hair. And I kept thinking about how can I support him. And, you know, immediately my thoughts were like, I could reallocate resources because I go to school, and I could try to support him in creating events and paying for his work and his labor. He died of a heart attack, and this was during the pandemic. And I, you know, immediately my thoughts were, I wasn't sure, like, if he was sick, because there's a lot of people who haven't reported from how people have died. And it was just, you know, came as a shock because no one knew anything was wrong. But then you think of like how in this country, a lot of us don't have access to healthcare. And even it could not have been, you know, it might have not been COVID related. But it angers me and it makes me really frustrated that this could have been prevented. And it breaks my heart because during the pandemic, I was really scared to visit him, to go over his baby shower. And I just think of like, it was just really hard to try to be in a better headspace, to prioritize family over my academics, because I know the way my mind works, and for me, I have to put a lot of attention to my academics because that's not who I am. You know, I don't sit down and read for hours or try to figure out this test. I'm an artist, and so it's just so hard for me and for my family, and trying to negotiate, you know, this whole mask wearing, you know, with family, because it's like, and that's another thing, right? We don't have this conversation around consent, about how comfortable we feel. And so it's just this other thing that we had to negotiate. And it was so hard for me because I haven't seen them. I've been estranged because of growing up queer and not feeling like I had a space within the Chicano community.
Hey, can you translate 2,000 hours?
And I have my nephew here, and it was really hard for me to come back and it was so hard to wear this mask and feel estranged even further with them. And so right now we're building stronger relationships. I've lost several family members in Mexico también, and it's been a really huge hit because my family, again, they're poor people, like they're poor folk. They moved from the rancho and moved into the city, and they live not in the best conditions. And you can see the effects of modernity, the effects of this progressive sort of statecraft. You see the poverty that is so present in their lives. And my aunt lost half of her family to COVID. And it's been so hard because, again, this do we visit them, do we, we had these plans to go see them, and there's just, if I could hold time in my hand, I would, and I would make sure like to be with them. And I think with this whole pandemic, a lot of lessons and relearning old lessons, especially about not having control and understanding my situation. I can draw out like a whole historical mapping of the oppressive structures, of recognizing that, I'm here because of a system that continually devalues our knowledge, our bodies, our work, our minds. But I think, again, it's just like learning that I can't control some things, and I have to try to control my mind, my emotions, my physical well-being, practice wellness. And I see a lot of my friends who are working in the medical field. They're both Chicanos, and they're beat. They are exhausted, and I'm trying my best to give them tips to try to find some sort of peace, some harmony. And it's really hard, and I'm just recentering myself on how can I ensure that I can provide spaces for people to find time for wellness, and I think it's really hard within a community that has been oppressed for so long, that they don't feel like that they're deserving of rest. And I think it's so hard for people who've been oriented to work for so much. It's so hard for them to find rest. And it's so hard for us to find time to handle our traumas. And I think more than ever, it has solidified what I want to be doing with my life. And I don't do what I do. I don't go through academia because I have this sense of finding some sort of success. I find it in ensuring that I can help other people come to a better realization of themselves through a lot of these restorative practices. And I just want to say thank you again for listening, and thank you, Willie, for providing me this space. And I think, talking about survival, like it's a hard topic for me, because it just seems like, when are we going to find this time to truly find rest and try to really connect as humans, as people? And that, if I can give you anything, I think ensuring that you provide time for yourself and provide time for your self-care. And I think that's extremely important. And finding those spaces, I think, like having these spaces and ensuring that you're creating spaces, because no one's going to give you that, people in power aren't going to give you that space. They're not going to give you that money. And I think it's really frustrating to tell, to remind myself that I have to put that work in. And that is the current condition of my life. But I'm very blessed, and I'm very blessed that you all are taking the time to listen to all these people and their stories, and I'm very moved by everyone, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro, for putting so much on the line right now, and yes, for sharing. And then I saved my ode maker for last. You don't need to read an ode, but I very much appreciate your love and energy. And we're gonna have you go, and then we're gonna do the Q&A.
Joke's on you, Willie. All I have are odes. That's all I write. It's a problem. I'm very honored to be with y'all tonight and be sharing space with y'all. And I feel humbled almost. Like I feel this is such a great opportunity to be able to share space with y'all. I have two poems that I'd like to end the night with. One is an ode to one of my queer ancestors in my family line, who is the only other queer person I know of in my family line that lived in Utah. And the other one is an ode to a better time and a better space than we are in now. So yeah. A seance for Leona. If you're here, please show me a sign. I'm in a silk robe sitting cross-legged in the middle of my room on the night of a full moon. My bed is pushed into a corner, a flimsy black cloth on the floor. The only light is coming from the glow of 5 white candles shaped like angels, surrounding a picture of my great Aunt Leona. I breathe deep and whisper, if you're here, please show me a sign. And I don't know if I'm expecting my mirror to crash onto the ground or what, but I wait in silence for a minute before asking again, you're here, please show me a sign, and still nothing. So I ask for a third time, and it comes out more like a plea. You're here, please show me a sign. I think of how I got to this place, praying for the first time in years to reach out to a woman I have never met in person, begging with all my heart for an answer, something to show me that she is still here, still willing to talk to a queer kid who needs her so badly right now. My great aunt is the only other gay person that I know of in my family tree, and I carry her name in the pit of my stomach. A nagging reminder of how far my family has come and how much more they need to grow, and I'm trying to summon her here for advice, for a hug, for anything, because I can't tell if my family thinks I've ruined our lineage for asking them to speak my chosen name in public. I can't tell if the whispers behind my back at every family dinner are real or not. I can't tell if my last name is one I can truly be proud of. So I ask for a fourth time, if you're here, please show me a sign. And the candle wax drips onto her picture and forms a heart. Thank you. And then this one is called Ode to the AJJ Concert at Kilby Court on September 2017, because we get specific with these odes when we write so many of them. I was taught that you would leave holy places feeling like you were walking with angels. So I reimagined this childhood church to be this building, and prayers from silent pleadings with the Lord to everyone in the congregation screaming their favorite song along with the band, and every song the band plays is the congregation's new favorite song. The opening prayer is led by a man who hasn't showered in weeks, a 30-something commie who sings protest songs and teaches everyone the words. The boy next to me is praying for forgiveness, and he is singing the loudest of all of us. We are all sinners, and this is a new form of confession. It's so much easier laying out everything in front of God when God is the crowd pulsing around you, making you forget where your body really ends. You feel yourself floating to the ceiling. Someone grabs you by the ankle and reminds you that this is not about you. Our preacher leads the congregation through a 2-hour-long service, and we still beg for more, whether we want more forgiveness or guidance. I'm not sure, but he gives us what we ask for. I don't know what to call my newfound religion, but I know our baptisms are ones of sweat and spit. The Holy Ghost is the girl next to you who steps on the toes of any man who tries to push past to get to the front. She offers everyone around her earplugs, holds stranger spots so they can go to the merch table. She is the most held together person in the room. Her sacrament comes in the form of hydro flasks snuck into the venue, full of either water or something else, something that burns. You do not know which until you drink. You wake up the next morning, body still pulsing to a beat that stopped hours ago. You are not the same person that entered the concert, but one now full of holy words. Jesus rose from the tomb after 3 days, and it takes 3 days for my ears to stop ringing with the sound of a cello. I finally understand why people go to church every Sunday. Commune with God on a regular basis. Every weekend I play their record one more time. Let my body sink back into a holy space. Shroud me in leather and embroidered patches. Let me be reborn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enan. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I kind of entered this night without any expectations, just knowing that I was bringing together like a really wonderful group of people together, and whoa. Yeah, this was really special. Shout out to Emily, who's been doing all the hard work in Zoom, like everything that took skill, Emily did. And shout out to Phoebe for handling the captions for us. I'm going to give everybody the power to, wait, that's not how I do it. This way. I want to give everybody the power to unmute themselves. How do I do that again? I was taught this before.
That's okay, I just did it. So
oh, you just did it? See, Emily's the one doing all the hard stuff. Emily taught me, and I still couldn't really do that.
You got this.
But reminder, I can click and kick you out if it gets weird, but I don't expect it to get weird. Yalia stayed for us for this whole thing. We're in a Q&A. Let's give it like, generally I plan like 2 hours for these events, so we have like 25 minutes if we wanted to take that up. You can turn on your camera, turn on your mic, and say what's up to people, ask questions. Please put it in the chat, yes, so that we know when to expect you, and then I can like call on you and stuff like that. We have a lot of really special people in the room, and especially when it comes to Connell and Becky, I am always extraordinarily grateful when, yes, I get to share space with older members of the queer community. And part of that is because I never had grandparents. My grandma died and lived in El Salvador. And then my dad was an orphan, and then my grandpa died when I was young. So I never really got the experience of having like older people in my life. So, you know, it always feels like, this is what it likes.
Older people.
The white hair. I aspire to Connell's beard. Okay, I can ask questions all day, but I do want to open it up to whoever wants to speak right now. So yeah, we can awkwardly wait for a moment. I can just keep rambling. If not, I have a question for Connell, but also there's people in this room. I'm going to ask my question for Connell to open things up, and then we can kind of bounce things around. And panelist people, the poets and storytellers, you can ask questions of each other too, just because, you know, we're all sharing this space together. But Connell, you mentioned being in the military, which I kind of knew about you, but was also still surprising. I feel like there's so many different versions of who you've been, and I've just completely been so excited about like the version I've gotten to meet. But I guess part of what I'm curious about is, yes, what that experience was like for you being gay in the military, and what that journey, what you kind of took from it. Yes, because that's a very that's a very specific experience, and if you were willing to share that, I'd be super grateful to hear it.
Yeah, so it's kind of an odd story. First of all, even though I was closeted, I was very self-consciously aware that I was gay. And I wanted to understand the homophobia that was written in Hebrew scriptures. And so one of the things I wanted to be when I was still very closeted was a biblical archaeologist, because I wanted to kind of figure out what was going on in ancient Hebrew culture and in language. How did we get these calls for execution of men who sleep with men that are in the Hebrew scriptures? And so to that end, I was going, well, I'm going to be going to the Middle East, and if I'm going to be participating in archaeological digs, I need to learn to speak Arabic. And so I joined one of the reasons I joined the military was to go into military intelligence, and I went to the language school in Monterey, California for 2 years learning to speak Arabic. So that was part of my secret homosexual agenda. And then also I fell in love with my best friend, Scott, and Scott was doing a similar program, but in Russian. And so I kind of followed him to go into that. And whatever, it was, I feel like the military raped my soul a lot. Like it was just, the machismo, the sexism was horrific. The homophobia was horrific. Especially like in basic training and all that stuff that I had to go through. It was such a bad scene. Then I showed up at the language school in Monterey, and I swear to God, there were at least a third of the people in the military language schools, and there were thousands of us there. A third of us were extremely queer. I all of a sudden, like, what down the hall in the barracks, this guy was a drag queen, and he was doing drag on stage at the local bar and stuff. And in my own unit, there were about 12 of us students together learning to speak Arabic in our little unit. And we were from all the different branches of the military. So there were Marines and Air Force and stuff like that, all in our little class. And two of the Marines, these butch, hunky, handsome as hell men, they'd been lovers for 13 years. And it was an open secret that these two men were together, these two big hunky Marines. And the Marines bumped them together and gave them the same assignments. It was sort of a tacit acknowledgement that they were a couple. It was just so like, so there was the official policy that was really anti-gay. This was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. If there was a hint, a whiff of gayness about you, they could just kick you out. And so it was so weird that all of a sudden I'm very much surrounded by a lot of queer culture, but also at the same time it was very restrictive and oppressive. It was just horrific. But living in Monterey, that coastline is gorgeous, and I would just, the second my military duties were over, I'd hop on my little moped and zoom down to the beach, and I would just stand on the rocks and cry to the sea. I would just bawl and pray and just, let that giant ocean, the Pacific Ocean, just come and help me get through another day. If it hadn't been for the ocean there, I wouldn't have made it. But it was just, it was a mess. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, you did. You were very generous in your response. Thank you so much, Connell. Is there other questions? Because if not, I'll just be popping them off. I got mad questions for folks. My next question, you could also put it in the chat, or you can just interrupt me right now. I'm down for people just interrupting me. I need to be interrupted more often, I feel like. But if not, Becky, you ran the KRCL show on LGBTQ stuff for like 20 years or so. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey there and what it was like? KRCL is such a magical space. I got to be there when I was a youth doing loud and clear youth radio, and it was one of the first places I got to be myself in. So KRCL has a special place in my heart, but as somebody who, was literally a child during the time you would have been on the radio, I'm kind of just curious what that journey of programming was like for you.
Well, I'm pretty sure that most of you know how KRCL came about. The founder, and all of a sudden my mind's going blank and I can see him and I can talk, but he discovered that there was no place in Utah where you could talk anti-Vietnam War. So in the 60s, he's aware of this. I love teasing him about, I was already a flaming Democrat when he was still a young Republican. So he's 10 years older than me, but I was in the correct political leanings long before he was. So it took him 10 years, and finally KRCL went on the air in 1979, December 1979. And I worked night times in a computer bank key punch job, swing shift. And at night, we could play the radio, and there were two of us that were in charge of running the radio because we were the young ones. And I don't even want to let you guys put all the years together that I was young once. But she came in, this absolutely amazing friend, and turned Friday night, as soon as the bank cleaned out and we could turn the radio on. On Fridays, it was all Black African-American music. I had never heard anything like this. And KRCL went off the air at midnight back then. So it was probably the second Friday that they were on the air. It was the first time I tuned in. And I was so stricken. It was so amazing. So I started listening. And there was a program called Deja Vu. And it was just really bad gay music. Basically show tunes. What can I say? So then Concerning Gays started. And the person who was doing that was reading from a failed thesis that had been written by a gay man at BYU. And was it just, if you wanted them to ignore lesbians, because what they did write about women was beyond misogynistic. Well, it turned out the person who was doing the reading, there's people involved in this, but Stacy Aronson, he called himself Stan Erickson, was the host, and he was having an absolutely lurid affair with the person who had been my high school drama teacher. So the drama teacher introduced us, and I was supposed to just go on and give a hand for a few weeks till they could find another woman to replace the woman who had left. And then I left when they changed the program at KRCL 20 years later. So, but during that time, we did things like death threats. Oh my goodness. We get the most vicious, horrible, threatened to bomb the station. It was a 25-minute program. And we would have things like KRCL programmers would be, out protesting wars, and it'd get on the TV to reply, and it'd say the radio station that has the gay program, has the queer program, the homosexual program. Oh my goodness. When was the last time any of you heard the word homosexual? So I ended up, I went by the name Mickey because I thought it was funny as hell to be Becky Moss. And my engineer called himself Donald Dean just to be silly, and people didn't even get the joke, but they used my name so often and my voice was so recognizable that by 85 I stopped hiding my name. And we went from getting death threats to getting awards, and we got more awards from Concerning Gays and Lesbians than all the other programs put together. And I don't want to go, you know, right now the station's closed down. You can't get in and can't go because of pandemic. But if you ever get a chance to, go ahead and look into the one room. We got some really impressive awards in there. To go from being hated, reviled, despised, hearing terrible things, I had to tape the program and then play it so that I couldn't be in the station at the time it was live because we had so many death threats. The FBI got involved because there were death threats that came through the mail. And the FBI and the station manager got mad at me because I didn't take the death threats really seriously, because if you spell the word bomb, B-O-M, I'm really not concerned about your ability to build one. Willie, I don't know what more to tell you about it because it was lovely and wonderful and terrifying. Oh, and I should let you know that I had the world's worst case of public speaking. Even now, I still have difficulty. And I tried to convince people that my real theme music was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, because that line, the girl with colitis goes by. I know most of you don't even know the song. You're probably, I'm again, ancient history. Wait a minute, Enan, don't fall out of your chair. Goodness, okay, then I better warn you all. I had a poem prepared for today, and I'm gonna do it. I was standing on the street as quiet as can be when a great big ugly man came up and tied his horse to me. Back to you, Willie.